Welcome to History Legends, and I'm very happy to have my guest, Nick, a former member of the Canadian Forces, and today he's going to talk about his experience in Afghanistan.
Hey, thank you for having me on the show, Alex. I think oftentimes what our Canadian soldiers do and where we go isn't talked about enough. We
Yeah,
hear so much
exactly.
about what other people are doing, but we don't hear often what our own people are doing. So I appreciate you, sharing your platform with me tonight uh, to be able to talk about that stuff and sort of dig into the nitty gritty about it. PTSD, some of my experiences. Yeah, let's chop it up, bro.
Perfect. Can you share the name of your YouTube channel? Link will be in the bio.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody, I do have a blossoming YouTube channel. On YouTube, I go by the name Gman5338. If you're wondering about the number, not random. That was my badge number when I was a police officer, because not only was I a soldier, but I was also a cop. And so, yeah, you just go onto YouTube, check out Gman5338, and you'll find me there. You can also hit me on TikTok as Tested Metal. That's Mettle.
And this is where we met.
That's right, brother.
All right, Nick. So tell us why you even joined the military. Talk about your youth just before joining and what brought you in the Canadian Forces.
My youth, man. Wow. I was a bit of a troublemaker as a kid. I was into shit here and there. Nothing serious, but I did get into trouble from time to time. But I grew up basically in a family of immigrants.
Oh,
My dad's family is from Holland, and my mom emigrated to Canada in the 60s. So my old man was actually sort of conceived in Holland and was born in Canada.
all right.
So I consider myself kind of like a first generation Canadian, basically. My mom is actually, was American until recently. So I had dual citizenship as a kid, but I didn't sign on. The Americans have, it's called a selective service agreement or something like that.
Right.
And basically what it is that if you're 18, able-bodied, you have to sign up with them, and it makes you available for the draft. And if you sign up on that, that means you have a commitment to a foreign military or a foreign government, and it makes it awfully difficult to become, almost impossible to become a Canadian soldier. So I had to leave my dual citizenship behind to join the Canadian military. But when I did join the Canadian military, it was sort of serendipitous that I mentioned my family, part of my family came from Holland. So they experienced all the traumas of World War II with Nazi occupation. And my family actually was part of the resistance. And my Opa, from probably about the age of 12, had taken up arms against the Nazis. And if you've ever heard of a battle called the Bridge Too Far or the Battle of Arnhem, my Opa was part of that, and he led the British paratroopers across the river so that they could get back to England. All the injured were left behind, but anybody who could walk, he helped pull them out. And there's actually a part at the end of the movie you'll see, and it portrays my grandfather.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, and then on my Oma's side, they all lived in the same area, like kind of Oosterbeek, Arnhem, Breda in Holland. And my Oma, her town was liberated by the regiment that I joined. So I initially joined the regiment, which is called the 1st Hussars. They're out of London, Ontario. They also have a squadron out of Sarnia, Ontario. But that was the regiment that liberated my town, and that's how I started in the military.
Wow.
Yeah, that was me in a nutshell, from youth to hopping into the game, man.
Fascinating. And so what brought you to the military per se?
For me, it was kind of a pay it forward thing. I knew that I was living in Canada basically off of the blood and the sweat of other people. And it was people from Canada, you know what I mean? Like I said, the regiment I joined, they were the ones who liberated, the family, or the town my family came from. So the veterans that I met who had we wore the same uniform, you know what I mean? The same
Yes.
headdress. And these were the guys that were feeding my grandma chocolate when she was a kid, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so it was, for me, it was to pay it forward. You know, I had to
Mm-hmm.
earn, for me, I felt it anyways, that I had
Mm-hmm.
to earn the right to call myself a Canadian, or I should say the privilege to call myself a Canadian.
Yes,
So I
that's
joined to fight the good fight, you know?
wow. And tell us about your first year in the Canadian Forces. So from the moment you signed up, basic training, and from there on.
My first year was wild, and it sort of should have clued me in as to how the rest of my career would go in the military. But I signed up. I did basic training, which all in all, I know we have a program in Canada called Army Cadets, and it's for youth to get involved in, and it teaches them sort of the fundamentals of military life, and it offers Army, Air Force, and
Right.
Navy training. So I had been through Army Cadets as a kid, so I kind of knew what to expect from basic training. I mean, you're going to learn how to do drill, you're going to learn how to shoot a gun, you're going to learn how to blow shit up, and you're going to learn how to find your way around. You know what I mean? And that's what we did. And you know, basic training for a lot of people, it's very difficult because you have to adjust your mindset from living a civilian life to living now a military life. Now living as, you're essentially a member of the government now,
Mm-hmm.
and you know you're part of that, and it's a lifestyle change. I'm telling you. And so a lot of people have a hard time with that,
Mm-hmm.
but they know how to break you down and how to build you back up.
Right.
Uh, and so it's just that breakdown phase where people have the problem. It's always climbing up that people, you know, it happens fast and it happens hard, man. But basic training, you can do it. You know what I mean? It's, for the most part, it's mind over matter. If I can give you one tip, if you're looking to do, you know, get into the Canadian military, basic training and any training you go through is going to be mind over matter. Free your mind, your ass will follow, okay, people? So if you believe you can do it, odds are you're going to be able to do it. So don't ever forget that, all right? Take that with you. So I did my basic training, and then from there in the Canadian military at the time, we had something which was called a QL3, and that's where you learn the basics of the trade that you were getting into. So at the time, I was an armored crewman. So I had to learn the basics of being an armored crewman. And usually that's done in Meaford, Ontario, for my area anyways, and it's taught by reservists. But at that year, at that point in time, they didn't have enough room for me to go on a reservist course. So I was fortunate enough to do my QL3 with the Royal Canadian Dragoons in Petawawa, Ontario. Great bunch of soldiers. These are switched on troops. And I got to say, the premier armored regiment in Canada. All right. But I even got to do my QL4 after that. So I was trained on the Coyote reconnaissance vehicle as a driver. And that was essentially my first year. But then I rolled into tour. All right, so that was my basic training, basically my first year in. But get this, at the end of my first year, doesn't 9/11 happen? All right, so I end up on, I get tasked to do, as soon as I get back from all of my sort of basic training to make me a qualified soldier, as soon as I get back to my regiment, 9/11 happens. Then I get picked up to defend, to do base defense, basically, in my hometown, because we used to be a major hub for the military. It's the home of the RCR. So it used to be pretty big, militarily speaking, or militarily speaking. And so I was called up to do base defense, and I decided at that point in time I wanted to go reg force. I want to do this shit full time. But things didn't work out. I was actually on a tasking with the military. I couldn't make my appointment to get the interview with the military because I was working with the military.
Right.
That's how crazy government work is. But so I lost my ability to go reg force, but then we needed people to deploy to Bosnia.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a position open. The staff who worked at the headquarters at the 1st Hussars felt bad that I missed my chance to go reg force because I was on this tasking, right? So they said,
Right.
well, listen, how do you feel about being a rifleman for a year? I said, hey, sure, sign me up. I don't care.
Because your training was in armored vehicles, right?
Yeah, so I was initially an armored crewman. I was a tanker. Not that in the reserves you got to actually deal with tanks, but that was your trade, was a tanker, right? But anyways, yeah, so I had to re-roll. I had to change everything all over, and I got sent out to the 2nd Battalion PPCLI. Fucking Dirty Patricia's up. All right. So yeah, I became a rifleman with them. We spent a month down south in the States in Fort Knox, Kentucky, training to deploy to Bosnia as a reserve company attached and now being taken on by the 2nd Battalion.
Right.
And so we deployed like that as a reserve company. And it was pretty eye-opening. You know, I'd always wanted to go experience it. I wanted to, you know, just take it all in. And that's kind of when things started going south for me. You know, I remember one day we were kind of, a lot of our
So what
AOR,
year? So what year was that?
this would go back in 2003. So we spent 2002 training, and 2003 we deployed. And where our AOR is, an AOR is an area of responsibility. So that's the area that we're patrolling, looking after. And a lot of the front lines, when the Civil War ended in Yugoslavia, it parted off into various factions. And everybody kind of in the UN and NATO at the time had to vie for pieces of what was the former Yugoslavia. And so a lot of our AOR consisted of where the war ended. And so that's where you saw a lot of the worst of the worst fighting, the worst of the ethnic cleansing, mines, all that kind of stuff. And I remember one day we were at, it was like a gravel pit or a gravel quarry. It appeared to be anyways, in a field. And around it was trees, but it was all kind of, this area was plowed down and there was the water in the middle of it. And it was a mass grave.
Wow.
And that's something that, like stuff like that were big eye openers for me.
Right.
You know, and you know, sitting there eating my lunch, smoking cigarettes, and it's right next to, you know, like 500 people mass grave.
Did you see people fighting each other in Bosnia?
Okay, so by the time I was there, I was part of S4, so we were sort of the last kind of contingent of NATO troops in the area. But that doesn't mean that the hostilities or the fighting had subsided. And like I said, a lot of our AOR existed on the borders of that war. And that's where the hostilities are still very fresh, right?
Right.
So I remember there were times people called us for help because they were getting firebombed out of their house. So people were throwing Molotov cocktails into their houses. There was a birthday party one time I remember we got a call for help for, and people were throwing grenades into a kid's birthday party. All kinds of shit. Like the hostilities were still, I mean, for the most part, I would describe it as a peaceful tour, but there were still those moments where things just, it's like there were still embers of a fire, you
Right.
know, and there were times where it would flare up. And then we still had a job too where we would go after war criminals, and one of our jobs was to go after war criminals. And if you go on my YouTube, people, you can check out a video where I talk about doing a raid on a war criminal. There were several buildings that this guy owned in a town called Behatch, and my company raided all of them. And me and my fire team partner were the first guys through the door. So we kicked in the door, we took people down, you know, but we were the first ones through, you know, and that's an experience.
How does it feel to be the first one through the door?
It's to describe it honestly, they're probably going to cut this out of YouTube, but it's like your heart is going to jump out the hole of your Uh, it's pretty like the adrenaline's going, and the dopamine is pumping, and we like, and of course, I mean, we don't roll without stereos in our vehicles, so we had music going. Like I remember we were listening to Kid Rock Cowboy, rolling up on this shit, you know. But yeah, when you first boot in that door, it's not fear that you feel. Uh, you know, there you have one goal in mind and one job in mind,
Mm.
and it's not until after. It's like at night when shit sort of builds up, and that's when you start feeling the fear. That's when you start feeling the loneliness,
Right.
and that's what brought me into becoming a cop. Actually, was that time at night. Um, when
Don't.
I describe some of the stuff to you, and when I describe things to people, um, it's not that I'm just talking to you about it. I'm reliving it, man.
Yeah, you know,
And so, like, I've had it happen on other shows, like other times I've collaborated with people, and I totally snap out, man. I'll turn away and I start shaking and shit. So, yeah, just be cognizant of that.
now
Yeah,
you can't talk about the transition between Bosnia and Afghanistan.
yeah, let's get into that. All right. So, when I left Bosnia, I was like the last of my platoon to pull out. So I took part in the handover. So I gave our area of responsibility over to the next guys coming in. So I flew out and I came home basically alone. Um, but it wasn't 6 months after that. And I was on my way to Afghanistan now, but as an armored crewman this time in my initial trade, right?
In what unit?
And I was attached to 2 Service Battalion out of Petawawa, Ontario, with their transportation platoon. So our job, my job, on my tour, my first tour to Afghanistan, which was out of Kabul, we were in Camp Julian. But my job was to run convoys. And so I've been all over Afghanistan. I've been from Kandahar to Bagram. I've been to Kabul. I've been to Jalalabad. I've been up into the Khyber Pass, into the Hindu Kush Mountains, all over the place. And so my job there was to, like I said, I drove armored personnel carriers. We call them the Bison. That's our version of it. Basically, it's a 4-wheeled tank, essentially. It's like a tank without treads. And we can carry like 12 guys in it, but we used to use those as support for convoys because it's armored. It's, you know, a place that people can get into. We carried rocket launchers on them. We had a C6, which is a machine gun, and that was up front. So it was a bit of protection, and that's what we were using in the early days of the war in Afghanistan. Now, it wasn't the brightest. I mean, there was a lot of things. Our equipment wasn't the best. We were just sort of changing from this idea that we were going to be fighting communist hordes over the hills to now guerrilla warfare, which is what we were engaged in. And so I was part of that sort of transition, and we had a lot of hard lessons to learn there. We lost a lot of people in those early days, and we lost at learning how to fight the rest of the battle.
You told me
Which,
about the Jeeps, how you transitioned out of the Jeeps.
yeah, we used to have, if anybody, like, go ahead, check my TikTok, check my YouTube, but my company car, I run a tattoo studio, and our company car is an old Canadian Army Jeep, but we were still using these at my time in Afghanistan, but there's no protection in them. They're like the old World War II Jeeps that you see where there's no doors, there's no roof, there's no windshield, you know, but in typical Canadian fashion, we were making do with what we have, and we were doing a good job of it. Now, like I said, we did lose some people. Jamie Murphy comes to mind. Back in the early days on Green Road in Kabul, and I believe he was in an ILTIS at the time, and he lost his life through an IED.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen these Jeeps blow up, like just a small anti-personnel mine about that big, just devastate these Jeeps to the point where all you're going to find is the bell housing from the transmission.
Tragic.
Um, and so I ran convoys through that. I drove armored vehicles. I commanded armored vehicles, did it all. I was close protection for the task force RSMs. That means I was the bodyguard for the sergeant major of the entire task force.
Wow.
So when we rolled out to go meet with, local public officials, various high-ranking military officials from other nations and stuff, I was there to make sure that the sergeant major stayed alive. I was his gun, so I had a lot of experiences through my first tour in Afghanistan, and I learned a lot from it.
Nick, can you tell us about how did you feel when you were in Afghanistan? Was it really something different from what you were used to? How was your relationship with the Afghan army, the locals?
So the I learned a lot from my first tour. I told you I was, one of the first guys through the door on a raid and stuff like that. And so I sort of I knew ahead of time what to anticipate, right? That lack of trust in people around you, that feeling that any minute is going to be your last, stuff like that. And I learned maybe not the healthiest ways to cope with it. I mean, alcohol played a heavy part in getting through the day. But yeah, you have that feeling that, when you're out there, that this could be my last. But you try not to dwell on it. There's so many other people around you that are counting on you to stay in the game, to keep your head in the game. You can't dwell on your own fucking problems. You got to look out for each other. It's
Right.
the only way you can survive it.
And how was your relationship with the Afghan army that Canadian forces were training?
Actually, I had an opportunity to get out with they're called the what was it, the embedded training team. So it was ETT, out of a camp called Black Horse, which was on Jalalabad Road, heading out towards Jalalabad and the Khyber Pass. And so I got time to see the ANA, and which is the Afghan National Army. I got to watch them learn. Like, this was their boot camp. I got to go watch them in their boot camp, and they had a lot to learn from us. Fighting to them isn't like fighting to us. A lot of religious practice comes into how they fight and stuff like that. So you have to sort of combat a lot of things that they've been taught through life that are part of their indoctrinated religious experiences, and things that you try not to mess with too much, right? Because that's their religion. You have to honor that. You have to respect that. But some of that is not conducive to fighting and surviving on a battlefield. And so they respected us. And really, I felt so bad for them. Like, there were times where they'd go without water, without food. And I remember them like kind of begging me on the side for stuff. The problem is that the Afghans weren't being paid. And so this is basic training. They're not getting paid. And tea, dude, believe it or not, tea is a fucking huge thing in Afghanistan. And so what had happened was a new recruit had a brand new fucking teapot. And his lieutenant fucking come by and was like, dude, you haven't been paid in fucking, how long? Where did you get that new teapot from? You fucking stole it. And he went to go take the teapot from the private, and the private, like, didn't fucking flinch, dude. Watch this happen. Didn't flinch, fucking cocked his AK, boom, 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 boom. Rounds right into this fucking officer's head, dude. And to top it off, the officer belonged to one tribe. The private belonged to another tribe, because they're very tribal.
Yes.
And now Black Horse exists. The camp existed between two fucking mountains, right? And so the officer's family came down. the private's family came down, and there was a fight basically for the camp.
Just tell the audience about the supply trucks, what they were about, like what convoys was it
So
supplies,
the
what is
convoys we
troops?
ran, yeah, like, and it differed day to day. I mean, like, we could be running tons and tons of ammo to guys. We could be running soldiers to different outposts or fobs,
Okay,
as they're called,
so yeah,
stuff like that. Like, we had a lot of stuff to protect. They were serious, man. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan,
yes,
but the sticky bombs. Well,
oh
the
yeah,
Afghans had their own fucking version of this. And what they would do is they would attach explosives to coat hangers, because, like, you'll see if you watch any footage from Afghanistan or Iraq, you'll see that we always have kind of caged shit
right,
on our vehicles and around our vehicles, right? So it's not that they were putting grease on it to stick it to the vehicle, but they would put it on a coat hanger, and then they would hang the coat hanger on your vehicle. And then they would run off, and you'd have to flick it off or you blew up. And so that's how the convoys went, man. That's how it was. And there were times when we killed people out there, like, whether you ran somebody over or you were defending your convoy, you did what you had to do.
mm-hmm.
Used to have a saying that it was better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Yeah,
uh, and so that's how we rolled. I mean, we had ROEs, but at the end of the day, you still got to come home in one piece, right?
mm-hmm.
uh, and so, yeah, I saw some stuff, man. I saw some stuff.
Transition by saying how the rest of your first tour happened, how you went back to Canada and introduced your second tour.
So my tour consisted of that. It was convoys daily, sometimes 2 or 3 convoys. My platoon actually did the reconnaissance into Kandahar from Kabul when we moved to Kandahar back in 2005, in the end of 2005, beginning 2006. But it was my platoon that did the reconnaissance all the way from Kabul to Kandahar to get the Canadians there. So shout out to my old platoon. I mean, these were some hard charging motherfuckers. Love them all. But so my tour consisted of that. It was the convoys. It was, we would get rocket attacks, all kinds of shit, but I think we were the only tour that came out without a casualty, to be honest. Uh, and so I'm blessed. But I came back to Canada after that roto, and I decided I was going to put myself through college. So I finished off college that I had started a little while before. And it was in me to be a cop. When I was in Bosnia, we were raiding a town, and my job was to control one of the roads in and out of this town. Well, we searched it. My platoon searched it door to door. And this guy came out of the town early in the morning when we first started the raid. And I searched him on the way out. I explained to him what we were doing. And he was very, compliant. He was a cool dude. I really liked him. But when he came back in a couple hours later, he was pretty cheesed with me that I wanted to search him again. But I couldn't let him back in without searching him because I didn't know what he was bringing in. My boys are still in there. They're still going door to door. And maybe the guy's got a gun or something, right? But anyways, during my search of him, he says to me, don't you have problems in Canada? Don't you have shit going on back home that you need to deal with? And, at the time I didn't, I focused on the job. I kept doing what I was doing, searching the guy and doing my thing. But like I said, at night, when you lay there, whether you're on a cot or you're on a floor or in the fucking dirt somewhere, things, go around in your head. It's very lonely. And so I got to thinking about this, and I said, you know what? This guy is right. I got to do something about what's going on at home. There are problems at home. And I decided at that point in time, I would become a cop. And so I went to post-secondary studies. And like I said, after my last tour or my first tour in Afghanistan, I entered into the last part of my post-secondary studies, and I became a police officer, but in the military. Um, there were a number of civilian police agencies that I was applying to, but the military police were the first ones to respond. And so I went through their recruiting process. Like, even though I was a soldier, I still had to re-enter the whole recruiting process. And I was successfully hired. And I started my police training with the military in 2006 is when I initially started, or was it, 2007? Sorry. Anyways, so I topped my courses though. I topped my basic police course, and I was posted to Borden, to CFB Borden, Ontario.
Transition about military police to the second tour, how you got from there to there.
So, yeah, I got to my first posting and it was a crazy ride. Like, I spent 6 months on probation, but not really on probation. I ended up on the drug unit after 6 months. So I worked undercover as a narc for a while. I did surveillance undercover, working both civilian and military. I worked street crimes. And that's when I started to get ready for another deployment. So there are small teams of military police throughout the world. And our job is to defend diplomatic assets. And so it's a crazy unit in terms of the military, in that it's 100% voluntary. You can never be forced to go to it. You basically have to ask to go. You do special training both in Canada and abroad with elite units. We've talked offline about this, Alex. Kind of what I went through to get into this job and who I trained with. And next thing you know, I'm on a civilian flight into Afghanistan. Not a military flight, a civilian flight, which is pretty interesting when you're flying into Afghanistan. Yeah, I land in Afghanistan, and I'm whisked away to, it's not like it is here in Canada or like North America. Their homes are protected by walls. Like, there's a lot of violence that's been going on there, right? So houses are like compounds, basically. And I lived in an apartment. I lived in a basement apartment in downtown Kabul, which was compounded in. And I looked after diplomatic assets throughout central Kabul. And we had interests in southern Afghanistan as well, into Kandahar and stuff like that. Now, I can't really get into details about how many people are on the team, the exact details of our training and stuff. But I can tell you that within 2 weeks of arriving in Afghanistan, it was October, November 2009. And I was on a treadmill running my fat, pasty ass off, right? And a huge boom. This treadmill exists in a gym, which is it's like a fortified bunker. It's so we can all go there, stay in shape, so we don't just sort of turn into fat, lazy sloths, right? So everybody's got their own workout routine and stuff like that. And I like to hit a treadmill for a little bit, get the cardio going before you hit the weights. And this explosion blew me off the fucking treadmill. It was inside a bunker. So right away, I knew I had to get to work. So I ran from the gym to my apartment, grabbed my gun, grabbed all my gear. I slapped on a pair of pants because I was in shorts at the time. But that was about it, I had a t-shirt on, my pants, and next thing I know, I'm grabbing Afghan civilians. I'm throwing them into bunkers. I'm grabbing attaches, our cook, man, I'm throwing into a bunker. And once we get everybody safe, I realize now that, hey, we've got to protect our fucking compounds, we we have to protect these bunkers, and there's only a few of us. And we start getting intelligence reports coming in that they had been dressed as Afghan National Army, and they had stolen armored vehicles, but we had no armored assets. All we had were our rifles, which were C8s. So they're the carbine version of the C7. Some hand grenades. We had a couple Russian machine guns called mini-me's, but none of that would stop armored assets. And there were Canadians rolling through. And I realized that they would probably have what we needed, which was a rocket launcher. And I managed to steal one from the Canadians rolling through, heading their way to do what they had to do.
How did you do that?
I can't tell you, because if I tell you, I'm going to get people in shit, dude. But it just a little bit of distraction and sleight of hand, you know,
All
a little bit of Penn and Teller, brother. But anyways, I got this rocket launcher to protect us from the armored attack, because this attack lasted for hours. It was a battle that went on for hours, and it was all around us. I remember, because I was so fresh to Afghanistan, like it had been a few years since I had seen any sort of combat. And I remember my hand trembling. Again, another Saving Private Ryan reference. My hand was trembling, and the only thing I could do to calm it was this. But still, there was that inside of me. I knew that I had to fight. I knew that we had to fight. The odds were against us. Like, we had in upwards of 100 people we were protecting over an area approximately a city block, maybe a city block and a half. And I'm telling you, there weren't enough of us to cover it. But it went on for hours, man. It was something else. But we came out on top.
How many enemies are we talking about? How many Taliban?
It was huge. They attacked the U.S. Embassy. They attacked the Pakistani embassy. They attacked ISAF headquarters. Everything, like the British embassy, everything around us got hit. They had tons and tons of people. If I would give you a ratio, it was probably like 8-1 or 10-1.
All right.
So if you've seen, what's that? Is it Argo? Is that movie with Ben Affleck?
Yes.
With the embassy takeover. You've heard of what happened in Benghazi. We were facing a similar situation. And it was like hours and hours and hours of this, man. Like, we even had a CSIS guy out with his pistol.
And how do you keep the cardio? How do you keep the fighting last so long?
Man, it's all about mental focus. Like I said earlier on, right? Like, your mind is much stronger than your body. As long as you believe inside, man, that this isn't going to be my day. It's not happening here. I am not going down. You know, your body is going to follow that mindset, and you know, the physical shit melts away, but it's afterwards is when it hits, man. And that's when you start shaking. That's when you start fucking. That's when I started drinking. You know, and maybe it's time to start talking a bit about PTSD here, Alex.
Yeah, let us know about your experience about PTSD.
Yeah, so I have complex PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. So I experience like epic depression, anxiety. I get flashbacks. I don't really sleep. When I do sleep, I haven't slept in a bed. I'm married, and I haven't slept in a bed in maybe a decade. I sleep on a floor or I sleep on a couch. But rarely do I ever crash with my wife. You know, there's a lot of things that I brought home with me, a lot of ghosts, a lot of demons. And they say the stats right now is that 1 in 4 of us came back with something. And I knew over there that I was going through stuff. You know, I would sneak NyQuil into my room, into my apartment. We could buy booze. You could get booze freely, but I was worried about people busting my balls about NyQuil. But that's how I managed. I spent a lot of time just chugging NyQuil and whiskey and beer. And you know, that was how I carried myself at least through a month and a half, 2 months in Afghanistan.
And you didn't want the people around you to know about it, right? So you
No,
kind
you
of
hide
toughen
that shit.
up, right?
Yeah. You know, you really start pulling away from people. Like that's one of the signs of PTSD, right? Is that you disassociate yourself from people um, because you don't want them to know what's going on. It's a sign of weakness. It triggers all kinds of shit. But I knew right away that, you know, yeah, I was going through stuff, but I just didn't know rightly how to deal with it. And like I said, 1 in 4 of us came home with it. 66% of those now suffer from addiction issues. So it's, you can see how and why I turned to the booze. And coming home, a lot of us suffer from the same thing. And then the addictions lead to suicide. And then you get, like the Americans have, 22 American soldiers a day kill themselves because of PTSD. And this is my big reason for wanting to be on social media now. You know, to keep my YouTube running, to get my TikTok going, is to spread that awareness that, you know, we're home now, but the war isn't over for us. We're still fighting. Our families are still fighting. My kids are affected by this. My wife is affected by this. And we just ask for some understanding. You know what I mean? A bit of patience and a bit of understanding.
It's a lot of courage to talk about this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, yeah.
It might interest the audience, but what do you see in movies from the Afghan war that you think is so unrealistic? I don't know if you've watched any, but
Yeah, I
are
tend to stay away from that stuff, but I can give a general portrayal
yeah.
of you know, like I know how most war movies go. I know what ones are really good in terms of like Private Ryan, Band of Brothers. Like those were really upfront as to how it is. They didn't, like, I never stormed the beaches, obviously, but I've seen combat and I've seen people killed. Like I know what it looks like, and that they capture it so well. You know, like I keep referring to it, like, you know, when my hand was shaking and stuff like that is honest to God shit. You know, like when I watched it as a kid, I never knew that I would be that guy. You know,
Right.
uh,
And
but
what
yeah.
about the things that are the movies that are not realistic or the stuff that is a bit far-fetched?
What are some of the, like, it's mostly like just the stupid action movies and stuff like that, like the Dolph Lundgren, Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of stuff that is far out in left field. But I mean, Hyena Road, if you want to go there, Hyena Road was a terrible movie about Afghanistan. I know a lot of vets don't like it. I've tried to force myself through it, but the only one like Canadian sort of modern movie I would recommend is called Peacekeepers, and it was made by the CBC, and it's about Yugoslavia in the early days, and it follows the 2nd Battalion of the
Mm,
PPCLI. I don't know where you can find it. Like, if you write to them, they'll probably be able to like give you a DVD of it or something. I've got a VHS copy of it.
oh wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I was a Patricia, right? And like I was a kid growing up hearing about Bosnia. I didn't think I would end up serving there,
Right.
you know.
And
So
did you watch the movie Benghazi or 24 Hours? Is it called?
no, like I said, stuff like that is too close to home for me.
Right.
So I don't. I try not to tempt fate too much, man.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like I get really bad reactions. Like, and I don't mind talking about this stuff, but like I shit my pants sometimes. I puke, um, just by watching that stuff, you know.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, I try not to.
So how about we move to more happy topics and talk
Positive,
about,
happy
yeah,
stuff, my
what do
man.
you have planned for the future?
Yes, for future plans, which is big for somebody with PTSD. You know, when you have PTSD, a lot of times you think that, you know, your life is going to end and it's going to end soon. So developing future plans is difficult, but I, through therapy and through everything else, I've started to ground myself, and I became a business owner. What I did was I opened a tattoo studio. I learned how to tattoo. I spent about 4 years from when I retired to 5 years, sorry, from when I retired to when I opened my tattoo studio, learning how to tattoo. And so now I own Canada's only veteran operated and owned tattoo studio. We're just outside of Borden, Ontario, close to Toronto. But that's my future plans, man. I love tattooing. It's huge therapy for me. It's therapy for my clients. I involve my kids in it. You know, my oldest daughter is 9, and she knows how. She can draw a tattoo stencil. She can put the stencil down. She knows how to do everything but run the tattoo machines now. But she's smart as a whip. She speaks 3 languages. So,
Oh,
you know, my family is a big future plan for me. My work is a huge future plan for me. And social media, you know, like I said earlier on when we first started talking, Alex, was that, you know, having this platform, bringing awareness to what Canadians have done, what we
yes.
did, what we're dealing with, and our issues still, you know, the things that we're currently dealing with. You know, I want to sort of be a champion for that sort of stuff. So I'm looking at running into politics. I want to become an MP. So I'm currently in the process of that. I got all kinds of stuff
As
on
an
the go.
independent, you said.
Yeah, as an independent. But if there's one thing I learned from getting shot at and stuff like that, is that you got to keep moving, bro. Don't settle down. Don't sit down. Don't stop unless it's absolutely necessary. You have to keep moving.
Right.
And no matter what things have, you know, come for me now, like I have my mental health issues, I have physical health issues from my time in service. But like I said, it's not going to slow me down. I'm going to keep pressing on, you know, and that's the Canadian soldier's way, man, is to press on, press on, press on.
Very happy for your future projects.
Thank you, my man. And I like, once again, thank you for bringing me on, giving me your
My
platform to
pleasure.
talk about this and get some awareness going and to share my story for me to testify. You know,
Yes.
that's great.
Thank you, Nick, for opening up to my community. I hope my community will follow you on TikTok, on Instagram, and most importantly on YouTube. And I encourage everyone to check out his channel for details that go more in depth.
Thank you, Alex. Once again, thank you. And if I can remind everybody, listen, stay up, stay strong, and look out for each other because we're all we got. Peace.
So thank you for going through my first ever interview. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.